John McMullen was at practice today. Eagles head coach Doug Peterson spoke. We'll get you the status of some of the injured players and so much more on the NFL and this Eagles-Redskins game, which, John, for all intents and purposes, for Philadelphia more so than Washington, is more important. Would you agree that this game is bigger for Philly than it is Washington?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty big for both, obviously. I think Washington more from the standpoint of obviously losing their quarterback and already losing to Dallas on Thanksgiving. So the thought was when that happened that they would sort of come back to the rest of the division that has already started. So I think they're concerned from that standpoint. From a mass perspective, though, the Eagles, I mean, they have to win. They have to win all these NFC East games. Yeah. And I think if they do, they have a good opportunity to win the division. I really do. If they're able to run the table, which is Washington, then Dallas, and then Week 17 against Washington, conceivable. I mean, the way this division is shaped up, especially if the Saints handle their business today, as most people expect, the Eagles could conceivably win this thing with 8 wins, which would be amazing. But it's a possibility.
Well, let's get your take then. Sproles back at practice. You read that. How much did he do, and are they anticipating him being ready to play, or is he just back out on the field?
Well, I don't think they're anticipating he can play. Remember, the last time he came back after the bye week, he re-aggravated, although Doug Peterson said, and you should never say re-aggravate. I'm hitting myself. It's aggravate. But he hurt himself right away. Now, Doug Peterson said it was a different hamstring injury. It wasn't the same one. But nonetheless, he was shut down immediately. So first we got to get through tomorrow. He practiced in a limited fashion. He was out there. He was warming up. And hopefully this is the first step to get him back on the field. But I heard you with Josh Adams and how does it mix in. I don't think it affects Josh Adams. Josh Adams is now going to be the lead back, and I think it more affects Corey Clement as the third down back, and it certainly affects the punt return role. That will be Darren's if he can get back on the field. But I think this team has realized that Josh Adams is their best runner, and he's going to be the lead back.
Do you think that we'll see any type of integration in the passing game with Josh Adams, knowing that they now are confident with him as the key, I don't even want to say feature back, but just, the lead of the pack?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know because that's not a strength of his as a young back. If you look around the league, I mean, the one thing nobody seems to be able to defend is those wheel routes. And if you have a back who can catch the football, you're in really, really good shape. And the most obvious there is Alvin Kamara, Todd Gurley's another, Christian McCaffrey. If you have a back like that, it doesn't seem like anybody knows how to defend it. And even lesser backs, and we've seen it at times with Corey Clement. I mean, I don't understand why, but for whatever reason, defenses haven't figured out how to deal with that. So I think more of the pass-catching game is going to be Corey, and if Darren can be out there, and Josh is going to be the runner, and that leaves you open for, obviously, tendencies, and defenses will pick up if Josh is in the game. You're probably going to run the football, so maybe from that standpoint you could fool him, but I don't think he's a great receiver at this stage.
I think the one interesting thing is you mentioned Corey Clement, and we kind of talked about this maybe Monday. He had maybe his best game of the year. I mean, he finally looked like he was a part of the offense. You know what I mean? But I guess the one area where this team has struggled is in running back pass protection. That would be an underrated reason for Sproles to be helpful still. I mean, even if you thought, look, he can't contribute in the offense or we've kind of got something going in the offense here, at least you could say we need the big block, and that's what Sproles would be the best of this group at.
Yeah, no question. I mean, just from the fact that he knows what to do, he knows where to be in pass protection, he knows who to pick up, and he's done it for a long time, and he's done it effectively for a long time. So I agree with you. That would probably be his biggest attribute at this stage, because everybody the Eagles throw out there, whether it's Josh or Corey or Wendell, they're not very good at pass protection, to be honest.
Is that just a byproduct of college football, that those guys just the offenses don't do that at all?
Yeah, it is. No question. No, you hear this from coaches consistently all over the league about young running backs. They're not asked to do it, so they're not very good at it. And it takes them a while to ramp up and learn. More than anything, I mean, a lot of guys have the ability to do it, but they just don't know how, and they don't know where to be looking. And with defenses today, and I just criticize them, and I think I can't criticize them enough for their coverage schemes. It's the exact opposite with the blitz schemes. I mean, they're really inventive, because
except
that's
for Jim
where.
Schwartz.
Yeah, well, the Eagles don't like the blitz, but I'm talking about the league as a whole,
right.
Because that's what they've kind of centered on, is that, okay, well, we can't. So many rules are against us as far as pass coverage, that this is the way we're going to go about it. You have all these inventive blitz schemes that started with the A-gaps and Mike Zimmer, and now everybody's into the overload blitzes. And these young backs, they just don't even know where to look half the time. So it is a learning period for most of them.
John, is there anything in this matchup Monday night where the Eagles offense could open stuff up and just change from 95% of the time, I feel like this year, maybe that's too much, 85% of the time this year, just being boring and stale?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, the funny thing is I think we might see that. Mike is probably going to laugh at this when Mike Wallace gets back. I mean, that guy is so important to this team. Nobody knows it. Nobody saw it. Never got to play with Carson Wentz. But they can't open up the field. They can't stretch the field. They got 5 guys who do the same thing at receiver. 5 guys. And it's Golden Tate, Nelson Aguilar, Jordan Matthews, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert. They all do the exact same thing. And nobody can stretch the field. So I think that's when you talk about boring. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's where it stems from. They need somebody to stretch the field, and the only body in this organization that can do it is Mike Wallace, and he's not quite healthy yet.
Well, what's the Mac Hollins story?
The reason, no, forget about Mac Hollins. The reason Mac Hollins, although nobody will admit it, can come back and play tomorrow. They're waiting for Mike Wallace. They are waiting for him because they know that's what they need on this offense.
Might be too late.
He is not ready. It might be. It might only be for the hope is you can get, whether it's 2 games, you can get to that point, you can win the division, then go on to run in the playoffs. That's what the Eagles are banking on. And the fact that, look, Mac Hollins is not a proven receiver. I mean, he's not going to come back and play anyway.
Right.
Because you have guys who are proven, they just do different things in the Jeffries, the Tates, the Aguilars, but what they don't have is a pure speed guy, and that's not Mac Hollins.
John, what's the conversation Tuesday morning if Dallas loses tonight and the Eagles win Monday night?
Well, I think from the fan perspective, they're excited and they're all in. I think.
Do you think they are all in for the playoffs, or all in for something more? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there's some spoiled fans who took that new norm nonsense to heart.
Yeah.
Thought this team is going to win the Super Bowl every year. But I think the most are just going to be happy that they're in a position. And by the way, I think that's going to happen. I think the Cowboys are going to lose today. I think the Eagles are going to win on Monday night. And I think they're going to be playing for first place in Dallas. And from that point, you sort of see where the chips are. But, yeah, the goal now is scaled back to winning a bad division. And it's been that way for a long time.
We're talking with John McMullen at JF McMullen on Twitter, and, of course, every day right here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Washington has got a lot of injury issues here, but they are 6-5. They're still, at least record-wise, better than Philadelphia. Would you say, though, that right now that you think Washington is a better team, or do you or Philadelphia is a better team, or do you think they will win the game because they're going to be at home on Monday Night Football?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with who's playing cornerback for the Eagles. I mean, and Rasul Douglas and Sidney Jones were the injured guys that were able to practice today. Chandon Sullivan as well, but that's not important.
Poor Chandon.
So, well, if Jalen Mills is not going to play. Avonte Maddox is not going to play. Jordan Hicks is not going to play. So, it's to me the corners were Jalen Mills, Avonte Maddox, and Rasul Douglas. The Eagles are probably a better team, but that's not going to be the case. But Washington, I mean, they're not very good. They're not very explosive with Alex Smith offensively. They try to run the ball with Adrian Peterson. And Mike, I've talked with you about that a lot, and that's, you can win that way, but the margin of error is very, very small from week to week. It gets even smaller when Colt McCoy is the quarterback. So it's very difficult right off the bat, and then you lose the quarterback and you have so many injuries on the offensive line. So this is a battle of sort of attrition and the fact that the Eagles don't have corners. They don't have an offensive line. They're playing with their backup quarterback. So, yeah, I think home field has a lot to do with it. And the Eagles are lucky to be playing at Lincoln Financial Field, even though they haven't been great there this year.
And that too, John, with Washington, it just feels like Washington, early, they had a good offensive line, but they lost the two guards. They do have a decent defense, though, right? I mean, they do. And the problem, the Eagles can't score.
Yeah, they've gotten much better on the defensive side of the ball.
Right.
The Alabama players up front.
That's what you just
really
do. Just
good.
Draft all Alabama defensive players and keep going after them.
That's right.
They traded for Clinton Dix, who's from Alabama.
And they just signed he's not going to play, right? The Foster, that whole story.
He's not going to play.
No.
And they're getting a ton of you-know-what for that. But,
yes, which as they should.
TJ Swearinger is having a great year. So they have good safeties. And they're really good in the front seven. And everybody knows Ryan Kerrigan is just an Eagles killer. So, yeah, it's kind of shifted for years. When Kirk Cousins was there, he would always throw for 4,000 yards. They were explosive. They could push the ball down the field. And their defense was never better than 21st in the league, and most of the time it was bottom 5. Now it's shifted. Now the defense is the strength, and they can't push the ball down the field.
Yeah, John, we saw last week with Malcolm Jenkins. He was all over the place, and, they had him kind of moving all over and doing different things. And, do you get the sense that Jim Schwartz kind of acknowledges that, yeah, we're going to have to stay creative with him and move him – No,
I was disappointed by that. I asked him that specifically because I think that's what set the Eagles off. I thought it was the silver lining of the Jordan Hicks' injury last year. That's when they started moving Malcolm all over the formation. Now, in the first half, he was playing safety and he was playing nickel linebacker at times. And then, only out of necessity, when Chandon Sullivan got injured, they had to move your buddy Crevan LeBlanc outside, and they had to play Malcolm in the slot. So he played 3 different positions. It had the feel of last year, but it was only out of necessity. And he doesn't want to do that, and I don't understand it because that confuses opposing quarterbacks. And he's a guy who can do it. He can play. He played 7 different positions last year.
Right, and the fact that he asked, didn't they? They went to him and said, "Look, we gotta do something here," and they kind of listened
it down.
Doesn't Malcolm have say on that during the week and be like, Jim, come on, man, I think I'm best utilized in this role.
Yeah, he does, and I think the Eagles listen. Their coaching staff listens to players more than most. but they just, and Jim specifically, and this is where I will criticize him. Look, I think he's one of the better defensive coordinators in this league. I've said that consistently. But where I will criticize him is he's got this mentality that the less moving parts, the better. And I get it. Usually that's the case, but usually you don't have a player like Malcolm Jenkins that can handle all these different positions and play them at a high level. So I think when you do have that, and when you're lucky enough to have that, you have to utilize it. And I don't think he agrees with that.
And we've had this conversation, I feel like, and this is where the disconnect is with fans watching this team, expecting Jim Schwartz to change. When you look at what they can do against Washington and knowing that this defense is not getting that much healthier with guys that aren't expected back by Monday night, again, I feel like every single week, for better or worse, we know exactly how this, minus, of course, the personnel, but from a strategy standpoint, we know exactly how this Eagles defense is going to match up with any offense they play because they don't change.
Well, there I will stick up for him a little bit because I think that's the case for most defensive coordinators. And specifically when you talk about cover two guys and even cover three guys now, I mean, you know where people are going to line up in July.
Fair.
Never mind a week before the game. And I think that's been the way of this league for far too long.
Well, maybe those teams have more element of surprise because they'll blitz more, and it goes back to that fundamental issue.
I mean, yeah. With Jim, at least when things do happen, like they happened last week, he will move Malcolm Jenkins around, and he will do those sort of weird things, whereas other defensive coordinators would say, okay, the slot cornerback went down. Who's next? Who's our next slot cornerback? They're certainly not going to play safety at nickel linebacker.
Right.
Darn sure not going to do that. And they're not going to play him at outside corner where he's done at times, depending on the matchup. So he is more willing to do things like that than most coordinators. I think that's more of a criticism of most of the league, and that's the way they handle their business. I would agree with that from just the way most defensive coordinators handle their business, and that's why they seem to be behind the offense as the offense starts to innovate.
Hey, John, just to go back to our running back conversation, because you asked Doug today. Yesterday, Deuce Staley had said it's a committee approach. Did Doug agree with Deuce?
No, he didn't. He said Josh is the starter. There's no hiding it, was his exact quote. But I mean, we know Doug's history since he got here. It's been a committee approach. But I do think there's always been one definitive lead back, and I think that's the difference. And it really wasn't. I mean, well, I guess there kind of was, but when it was Wendell Smallwood, I mean, that's not effective. So I think the Eagles got to the point, and I think it took them too long to realize at least this kid gives us some juice in the running game. He's very explosive. He's very fast. People don't realize that because he's such a big back. But he's their best runner, and it's not close. And that's weird to say about an undrafted kid, but it was a special circumstance. I mean, he was rated as a third or fourth round pick by most people until the foot injury came into play. So he's got talent. He was very successful at the college level, very high profile at the college level, and he's just got more talent than Wendell Smallwood or Corey Clement.
All right, we got plenty more on this game tomorrow, and of course, don't forget the Thursday night game tonight. You can catch that right after Mosher, McMullen, and Krause live from the Landmark in Glassboro. They'll take you right up until the Thursday night matchup between the Saints and the Cowboys, and we'll have that for you here live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, John, we'll get your pick tomorrow, although I know you said Eagles. I'll give you a night to sleep on it.
All right, thanks, Jess.